They told me it couldn't be done. Not because I didn't have the tools, but because they wouldn't let me. When you buy a $4 million hypercar, you think you own it. But when that car is a Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, one of only 60 in the world, and you decide to fix it yourself after a catastrophic crash, you find out very quickly that Bugatti still holds the keys. Welcome back. Today is the day we officially go to war with the most prestigious car manufacturer on the planet. As you guys know, we took on the Alex Goja Bugatti rebuild. For those of you just joining us, here's the short version. This Chiron Pur Sport was totaled in a crash in Miami. Insurance paid out. Alex bought it back at Salvage and then handed it to us because nobody else would touch it. Not because the damage was beyond repair. Because Bugatti made sure nobody could try. They didn't just refuse to sell us parts. They blacklisted the VIN. Every authorized dealer on the planet got the memo. This car does not exist anymore. They told us that unless it was shipped back to Molsheim, France, and repaired exclusively by their so-called flying doctors, their elite in-house team that travels the world servicing damaged Bugattis, it would never carry the Bugatti name again. The repair quote? $1.7 million. But the real kicker came from the top. Mate Rimac himself, the CEO of Bugatti Rimac, sent word that splitting this car in half, pulling the engine, and repairing the structural damage was a job that only 2 facilities in the world were equipped to handle, his factory and his other factory. My garage in Leicester was not on that list. They said it was impossible to split the chassis without specialized factory jigs. They said fabricating structural mounts would compromise the integrity of the car. They said the tolerances were too tight, the engineering too complex, the risk too catastrophic. And today, we aren't just turning wrenches. We are proving that with enough skill, a bit of engineering ingenuity, and an admittedly questionable sense of self-preservation, the word impossible is just a price tag dressed up as physics. So, here's the problem. To get to the transmission and the engine mounts where the real crash damage lives, we have to separate the carbon fiber monocoque, the structural tub that you sit in, from the rear subframe that hold the engine and gearbox. Bugatti says this requires proprietary hydraulic rail system, a guided track that keeps both halves perfectly aligned so nothing twists, nothing flexes, and none of the 14 titanium bolts that hold the 2 halves together get sheared or seized. We don't have a hydraulic rail system. We have this. That is a standard workshop waste bin. Wheels on the bottom. Flat top. My dad is looking at me like I've lost my mind. It's a bin, Matt. We're splitting a $4 million car using a bin. It's not just a bin, Dad. It is a precision-engineered, plastic-molded, multi-directional rolling platform. The concept is simple. We support the rear subframe on the 2-post lift so it stays locked in place. Then we lower the front tub onto this rolling base so it can slide freely. Once all 14 bolts are out and every line is disconnected, we push the front half away from the back half. Controlled, smooth, on a bin. But before any pushing happens, we have to disconnect everything that ties these 2 halves together. And on a Chiron, that list is terrifying. The 14 titanium bolts alone are not your hardware store fasteners. These are aerospace grade, torqued to insane specifications, and each one costs more than a decent used hatchback. Beyond the bolts, there are high-voltage electrical lines running the entire length of the car, complex wiring looms for the engine management systems. And then there is the cooling system. The cooling system on a Chiron is a labyrinth. 10 radiators. Yes, 10 separate radiators spread across the car, each with its own set of hoses, pumps, and bleed valves. And because this car was driven briefly after the crash before it was recovered, we have no idea whether the lines are clogged, whether the pump seized from running dry, or whether the heat did damage we can't see yet. Every single line has to come off, be inspected, and be capped before we can even think about separating the halves. It took us the better part of 2 days. My dad handled the cooling lines because his hands are steadier than mine, and because frankly he's been doing this longer than I've been alive. I focus on electrical disconnections, tagging every single plug and connector with masking tape and a marker, because if even one of these goes back in the wrong socket, we're looking at error codes that would take weeks to trace. Right? All 14 bolts are out. Every cooling line is capped. Every electrical connector is tagged and unplugged. This is the moment of truth. If Bugatti is right, the carbon fiber tub is already relaxed into a shape that can never be realigned. The bolt holes won't match. The whole thing will twist the second we try to move it. If we're right, we just saved over $100,000 in labor and proved that you don't need a factory in France to do this job. Ready? 1, 2, 3, push. The front of the car rolled away from the engine on that bin as smooth as anything. No twist, no creak, no drama. The two have separated perfectly, and for a moment, none of us said a word. We just stared at it. Then the cheering started. But the celebration didn't last long, because now that the car was open, we could see exactly why Bugatti was so insistent on keeping people like us away from it. The crash forces were far worse than the external damage suggested. The engine had been shoved forward by several inches on impact. The rear subframe was stressed in ways you couldn't see from the outside. And right there, on the cast aluminum transmission mount, was a thing that nearly killed this entire project. A crack, not a hairline. A jagged, ugly fracture about the size of a silver dollar, running through the structural support that holds the gearbox to the chassis. In the eyes of any dealership, any insurer, any Bugatti technician,
but with a Bugatti,
this is what they call
those normal
flaw.
rules just
It
don't
means
apply.
The entire
The
transmission
Spur Sport is one of the
casing
most
needs to be
extreme
replaced.
machines
A
ever
new
built,
gearbox
featuring
for
a
Chiron
massive
Pur Sport
8-liter
costs
engine.
north of $500,000, and Bugatti won't sell us one anyway, because the VIN is blacklisted. Now, I saw the comments on the last video. Thousands of you spotted what you thought was a hairline crack near the solenoid bank on the gearbox casing itself. Everyone was convinced the internals were toast. We spent 3 hours cleaning the entire assembly with solvent, going over every surface inch by inch, and what you were all seeing turned out to be residue from the fire extinguisher discharge mixed with road grime baked on by engine heat. The actual internal casing is sound. The gears, the valve body, the clutch packs, all of it checked out. The damage was isolated to this external mount, which is still a massive problem, but it's a very different problem than a destroyed gearbox. Bugatti's official position is that you cannot repair this mount. They say any heat applied near the transmission, whether from welding or brazing, would warp the tolerances of the internal components and destroy the gear mesh. And if this were a standard weld and braze situation, they might have a point, but we're not welding a patch over a crack and hoping for the best. What we're doing is engineering a replacement. We 3D scan the broken mount to capture its exact geometry down to hundredths of a millimeter. From that scan, we build a complete C80 model, correcting for the deformation caused by the crash. And then we sent that model to a CNC machining shop that works with motorsport teams, and they cut us a brand new mount from a solid billet of 7,075 aluminum. This is the same alloy used in aircraft landing gear. It is stronger, more fatigue-resistant, and more precisely machined than the original cast piece that came out of Molsheim. The original was cast. Ours is billet. In every measurable way, this mount is an upgrade. Fitting it was another story. 3 days of test fitting, shimming, measuring, and remeasuring. My dad and I barely spoke during those 3 days, not because we were angry, but because the concentration required was absolute. Every bolt hole had to align within tolerance. Every mating surface had to sit flush. If this mount fails at 200 miles an hour, the gearbox separates from the chassis, and the car becomes a missile. There is no margin for error. But it fit. It bolted in. And when we torqued the final fastener and stepped back, we both knew we had just done something that Bugatti said could not be done.
After this
the car is
Chiron Pur
back in one
Sport was
piece.
totaled and
All
attempting
14
the impossible.
titanium bolts.
This
torqued
isn't
to
just
spec.
a rebuild.
The cooling
The crash
system
left the
refilled
rear of
across
the car
all 10
severely
radiators
damaged.
and
Aren't
bled of air.
mass-produced like
The
a
billet
Ford or a
transmission mount
Toyota.
seated and secured.
They are treated
We
like
worked through
high-tech
the
art.
ABS
Owners
module
protect them
errors that
like
were
rare
thrown by the crash
treasures,
sensors.
while collectors
And
keep
we've
track
addressed
of
the
every
airbag
single
deployment
one of
code
them. You
with
would check,
bypass module.
and then you take it to
So
a
the
local
ECU
shop.
isn't stuck in a
Mechanics
permanent
swap
fault
out
state.
some metal panels,
Bugatti
and
said
you're
we
back
couldn't
on the
split it.
road.
We split
It's
on
a
a bin.
routine process that
Bugatti said
happens
we couldn't fix
every
the
single
mounts.
day.
We
The
machined
entire
something
car
better.
is built around
Now,
a
there's
carbon fiber
only one
shell
question
designed
left.
to handle
Will it actually
insane
start?
speeds.
This is what it all comes
While
down
that
to.
design makes
8
it fast,
liters,
it also makes
16
repairs a
cylinders,
total
4
nightmare.
turbochargers,
Alex Gonzalez
a quad
learned this the hard way
turbocharged
when he
W16
called a
engine
specialist
that
from
produces
France to
1,500
inspect the
horsepower
damage.
sitting
He
in a
realized
car
very
that the
quickly
manufacturer
that
has
hypercars
officially
are built
declared dead.
differently.
if this engine
Every
fires.
part is made in limited
It
numbers,
proves something that goes
which means
beyond
a
this
single
build.
component can
It
cost
proves that
more.
these
You
cars
see,
are not
Bugatti
mystical
has very
relics
strict
that can only
rules
be
for
touched by
damaged
anointed
cars.
hands in
These
cathedral in
machines
France.
wasn't happening
They
in
are
a local
machines.
shop. It had to
Extraordinary
be shipped
machines,
all the
yes,
way back to the
but
factory in
machines.
France
And
for a full
machines can be
restoration.
understood,
But
and
the
machines
price
can be
shocked
fixed by
everyone.
anyone with the knowledge
Just the
and
parts
will to do
alone,
it.
with a price
My
tag
dad
this
is standing
high, the
behind
decision
car.
seemed
He's
inevitable.
got his hand on
The
rear
insurance
bodywork.
company declared the
But what's
car a
left of
total
it?
loss. But
He
this
told me
raises
later
questions.
that he could
If
feel
the
the
official
fuel pump
path
prime
costs
through the
$2 million
I don't know
and
if
the
that's
factory
true
has turned
or if
its
he's being
back,
dramatic,
is the
but
car
I like
truly
the image.
impossible to fix?
Foot on the brake.
Or is there
Finger
still
on
a
the
way
start
to bring
button.
it back to
The
life?
starter
He is the
motor
guy you
turns
call
the
for the cars that
W16
most
over.
mechanics are
It
too
churns
scared to
once,
touch. Car
twice,
blacklisted
3
by the
times,
factory
and then
actually
16
be rebuilt
cylinders
without
catch.
sending it back
For
to France.
turbocharger
To
spool,
find out, he
and the
had to get the
workshop
car
fills with
into
sounds
his
so
workshop
deep
first.
and so
Once it
violent that the
arrived,
tools rattle in the
reality
pegboard
set
behind
in.
it.
Underneath all
It's
that
alive.
prestige,
The
the
exhaust
Chiron was
note
actually
is
built
different
in a
from the stock
modular
Chiron.
way.
Deeper,
This meant panels
rawer.
could be
We
removed,
had to replace
and
sections
bolts
of the
could be
exhaust with
turned,
custom
just like any
valvetronic
other
system,
car. Could be
because the
understood
original
and
was
worked on
crushed in the
outside the
crash,
factory.
And honestly,
And
it sounds
determination.
better. It
The
sounds
moment that
angry,
really captured
like
the
the
world's
car knows
attention
what it's been
came
through
when Matt
and has an
began
opinion
working
about
on
it.
the rear
I'm laughing.
drivetrain,
My
which
dad
included
is
the
laughing.
engine,
The
transmission,
lads are
and
banging on the
suspension
roof and
still
high-fiving
attached
each
to the
other.
carbon.
And someone has
Engine mounts
already
had been
pulled out their
examined,
phone to film the
panels
moment,
cataloged,
which
and
is
a
good
plan was
because I
formed
can
to
barely
repair
see through the
components that
tears.
Bugatti
I'm
refused
not
to
being
sell
dramatic.
individually. Crazy,
The fumes
but
in a
it
closed
worked.
workshop from
Every
a
movement had to be
W16
perfect,
at
because
idle
one slip
will
could cost
absolutely make your
hundreds
eyes
of thousands of.
We still have a
Step
mountain
by
ahead
step,
of us.
the drivetrain
The body
came free,
panels are
filmed the
back-ordered
entire
and
thing, and
blacklisted,
shared it with the
which
world.
means we're
See
going to have
them
to get
as
creative
precision
about
instruments
sourcing them.
built to handle
The interior
extreme
needs a
speeds.
complete strip
At that
down and
level,
retrim.
even a
The
tiny mistake
suspension
in the
geometry
structure
has to
can
be
be
checked
dangerous.
and
That's why
recalibrated
Bugatti
on a proper
usually
alignment
keeps such a
rig.
tight grip
And
on
at some
repairs.
point,
For many,
we have to put
it
this
was the
car on
first
the road
time
and
they could
prove to
see
the
how a
world and to
Bugatti
ourselves that
Chiron
it is
is
safe
truly
at the
built.
speeds it was
What
built
used to be a
reach.
mystical,
But here's what
untouchable
I need you to
machine
understand.
was suddenly
When a
something
multi-billion
anyone could
dollar
understand.
corporation tells
This
you something is
viral moment
impossible,
was a massive blow
listen
to
carefully to what
Bugatti's
they're actually
control
saying,
over its car.
because they
All
aren't
those
always talking
titanium
about
bolts
physics.
and custom parts
Sometimes
that were
they're talking
usually
about
hidden
profit.
behind a wall of
Sometimes
secrecy
they're talking
were
about
now
control.
out in the open.
They
Had
want
to
to protect
decide
this image
if
of
they would keep
perfection.
ignoring this car
This idea that
or
their
finally
machines
acknowledge
exist
the
on
man
claim
who
that
just
ordinary
exposed their
people
system.
can't
Some
access.
people thought it was
And
a
I get
brilliant
it.
way to
That
challenge the
mystique is
industry,
part of what makes
while
Bugatti
others
Bugatti.
believed it was
But
taking
this
things
car
way
right
too far.
here, missing its
While
body
most
panels,
CEOs would have
bolted back
stayed
together
quiet,
with transmission
Mate
mount
Rimac
machine
decided to
ourselves,
join the conversation.
rolling out a
Can have
workshop in
devastating
Leicester on Gray
consequences.
Tuesday afternoon.
While 3D printing
This car
can
is
be
more
useful
real
for
than
certain
any
components,
Bugatti sitting
be
in a
warned
climate control
that
garage
using it
as
for
an
major
investment,
structural pieces
because
could
this
be
one has been
extremely
broken
dangerous
and
at the
put back
speeds a
together.
Bugatti can reach,
This one
rather
has a
than the
story.
exact prices
This one
of
was
each
told it was
part.
finished, and it
The
refused.
repair was still
Mate
extremely
Rimac.
expensive,
If
but
you're
the numbers
watching, and I
circulating
suspect someone on your
online,
team
the
is,
entire
we did it.
response felt
The
like a
bin worked.
masterclass in
The
modern
mount
PR.
held.
See
And
them
the
as
Bugatti
precision
Chiron Pur
instruments built
Sport
to handle
is breathing
extreme
again.
speeds.
Now,
At
if
that
you could
level,
take us off that
even a tiny
blacklist
mistake in the
so we can order
structure
some
can
body
be
panels.
dangerous. That's
That
why
would be
Bugatti
brilliant.
usually keeps
Cheers.
such a tight